Hey guys, this is Miss Cat, and today we're going to be talking about how to spawn an object. Um, so when it comes to coding, it's more of it's called instantiating, but here we're just going to refer to it as spawning, like if we were to spawn an enemy or an obstacle of some sort, something like that. So the first thing we're going to need in here is we need to go up to create. We're going to create an empty, and I'm going to call this spawn. Oh, spawn. And I'm going to actually call this spawn point. Spawn point. So now I have a spawn point on here. For this, I just created a new blank scene just that we'd have some space to work in and it wasn't too confusing with what's going on in the scene. So I've got just a spawn point right here. The next thing I'm going to do is I got to figure out what I want to spawn. So now let's go into my sprites. I'm going to go to my white box and I'm going to find my white box sprite, and this is one I can use for an enemy right here. Doesn't really matter. These are just random boxes, ones that I have. So I'm going to grab this. I'm just going to drag it onto the scene. And sure, we'll say that's an enemy. If I want, I can size it up a little. Now, we're going to talk a little bit more about how to create or how to make prefabs and what those are. So if you haven't really learned about prefabs yet and you haven't seen a video where we talk about it, so prefabs are going to be objects or game objects that we store in our project with all of their, like, everything added in the inspector. And what I mean by everything, I mean if this character has a box collider, if this character has a rigid body, if it's got certain scripts attached to it, we put it all on our character. So that way, no matter the level, I can just click and drag it and it attaches for every time. So that way it's a lot less to worry about. And I don't have to make every single thing for it every single time. All right, so let's go over here and we're going to click Add Component. And I'm going to go ahead and add a rigid body 2D because what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to spawn this, and then we're going to talk about how to make it move after you spawn it. So it'll kind of work for shooting a little bit for you if you want to do that. It'll work for spawning an enemy that you need to go in a certain direction, or for spawning just anything that you need to go and move, or if you just want to sit there. So I'm going to go ahead and put this here. I'm going to add a rigid body. I'm going to take off my use gravity because we really don't want it to use it, or else it's just going to fall straight down. So I'm going to go to Add Component again, and I'm just going to add a box collider 2D. Oh, I added the rigid body normal. I want to add rigid body 2D. There we go. And now I want to add the box collider 2D. Alright, with the rigid body 2D, once again, make sure your gravity scale is set to 0. And the box collider is really big on there. I'm just going to mess with the values on it. Remember, if you try and size it up and down, you're not going to resize the box collider. You're only going to resize the actual character. So instead, come in here. I'm going to set this to like, nope, 0.5. And then I'm going to set this to like 0.3. There, that's about right. It's not quite exactly on there. I'm not too worried about though. So this is my box collider. I have a rigid body on here. We'll go back and we'll add a script to make it move later. But let's go ahead and make this new a prefab. So if you haven't done this already, go into your assets folder and create a prefab folder. So right click, do create folder, and go ahead and name it prefab. I already have one, so I'm just going to leave it there. I'm going to click into that. I have a few prefabs that I've already made. And then I'm also going to click in here on my white box sprite, because that's just what mine's called. I'm going to rename it enemy. And I'm also going to put the tag enemy on it. So I had to make my tag enemy, I believe. You can also make a tag for it if you want. Once again, this is something where it's just for me to have it as a prefab later on. This will work great. So once I have this the way I want it to be and the way I'm going to keep using it, I'm going to drag it down into my prefab folder. As you can see, it's now turned this little box blue. And what this says is this is a prefab now. And if you look, any changes that I make, oh gosh, I can kind of apply to my others, to my other prefab right here. So any changes that I make here, I can apply to all of them. But before I do any of that, I'm just going to turn this off. I'm going to leave it in my scene so I can edit it later if I want. And now we're going to focus on the spawn point and actually getting it to create the enemy. So I'm going to go back to my assets folder, go into my scripts, and I've kind of cleaned it up. As you can see right here, I put all my UI scripts really in here, the ones that just have to do with overhead only. And so I'm going to go ahead and right click, hit create, C# script. I'm going to name this spawn enemy. I'm going to click inside. So in my, I don't know what this is, in my spawn enemy, I just start off with nothing again, and I'm going to go ahead, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go public, game object, I say enemy, if I can spell it right, enemy, there we go. So now I've got my public game object enemy, and this is kind of going to be what we're going to call. And then let's see. All right. Now, let's just say that I want it to, on start, I want it to just call an enemy. And that's the only thing I want to do. So I'm just going to go to here. I'm going to type invoke. And then I'm going to put it in the little quotations, enemy. And I'm going to do comma. And, oh, not invoke, sorry. I did the wrong one. I didn't mean invoke, I meant instantiate. Instantiate. I was like, something's wrong here. Instantiate enemy. And now I can just say instantiate enemy. And I can press Command S. Then I can take this, apply it to my spawn point. Give it a second. And wait for it. Okay, so now it's on here. And I'm not going to grab the enemy sitting here instead for my spawn point. I'm going to come into my prefabs. And I'm going to grab my enemy sitting in my prefab so it knows to grab this enemy every single time. Cool? So now when I press play, I suddenly have a game object, right? I suddenly have an enemy there. But let's say, all right, I want to have an enemy there, but I don't want it to instantiate just on start. Let's say I wanted to press a button. So I'm going to add in if, let's see, get if input dot get key down, and then let's say key code, and we'll just say F. And I'm just putting F because it's for, usually I use it for fire or stuff like that. So I get key code down. Let's go ahead and instantiate. Enemy. All right. So I'm going to press Command S. And then one more thing I want you to realize is this is our spawn point. And when I press play, and then I hit F, F, it doesn't spawn quite exactly on there. And the way we can fix that is sometimes if you have like other code on it, it's not going to do that. Is I can, let me go back in here. You can add more lines of code to instantiate. And so instead what we're going to do is we're going to hit instantiate enemy, comma, this dot transform dot position, which says copy the position of my spawn point, and then I'm going to put this dot transform dot rotation, which says also copy the rotation of my spawn point. And so now I'm looking, or my enemy is going to come and be placed right at the position of my spawn point, and have the exact same rotation. And so you're wondering, well, that doesn't really make a difference in rotation for my game. Well, if you're doing a top down and you're having your mouse be the focus of where it's going to point and where it's going to shoot, having this line of code does wonders, and it makes it a lot easier. So now when I press play and go ahead, hit F, you see I can keep adding them, and because they've got a box collider on them, they just kind of keep moving around because they hit each other. But we have like this unruly amount of them, which is another problem altogether. But also, let's say I want it to fire. So how do I make it fire? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to go down, and I'm going to type in let's see. Actually, this is it for this code. So on this, I'm only going to make my enemy spawn here. And instead, I'm going to write more code for it to actually do something with my enemy. And the reason I do this is because let's say that I want to create an object that moves at different rates. And so I don't really want it all happening within my spawn enemy. So that's a lot of code to put on the spawn point instead of the enemy itself. So next I'm going to go into Assets, Scripts. I'm going to right click, do Create, C# script, and I'm going to call this Enemy Move. So enemy move isn't going to be like enemy track or anything like that. It's just going to be a simple enemy move. And so I'm going to double click to open it up in here. And let's go through what we need to do to actually make this enemy move. And so first thing I'm going to do is, now we've put in like public rigid bodies before, but we don't actually have to do that here. Instead, I can do rigid body 2D enemy RB for enemy rigid body equals this dot game object dot get component, and then the rigid body 2D. Alright, so this line of code, you just kind of have to trust me on it. What it does is it says, okay, we're going to look for the rigid body that's attached to this game object, which we're going to attach this code to our enemy. So it'll look for the rigid body attached to our enemy, and from now on, it's going to refer to that rigid body as RB. Then I'm going to go in here and I'm going to say enemy RB dot add force transform dot right times, and I'm just going to set it to a number, or we can make another public variable. So I'll actually come up here before I finish that line of code and I'll type in public float enemy speed. Nope. Speed. There we go. So public float enemy speed. And so I'm going to come down here. I'm going to type in enemy speed. So now my enemy has a certain speed that's going to travel in the and it's always going to go right. And this is where you can mess around with it, and it'd be a little different depending on what you're doing. But right now, I just want my enemy, as soon as it spawns, to go right and never stop. So I'm going to take that. So I'm going to take my enemy. Oh, give it a second. All right, I'm going to take my enemy move. They turn my enemy on. Attach my enemy move to it. I set this to, let's see, 20. Oh, I got that. Okay, so overrides right here. It may say override or it may say apply. And so what we're going to do is on this one, it says override. So I'm going to hit apply all. And what this does is it applies it to all of my prefabs, right? So if I click apply all, now every single one of my prefabs, if I go into my prefab, it will have that same thing on it. So I'm just going to close that. And now when I press play, now when I hit F, it should create, it's moving really slow, 20 is not high enough. But it'll create another enemy every single time I press it. And they're just going to keep going at 20, a speed of 20 forever in the right direction. So that's really how easy it is to spawn things. The code that you put on the spawned object is the difference it's going to make, right? So spawning the object itself isn't hard, it's just making it do different things. Now, the other thing you can do is if you have specific questions about this or want to know how to do this, I'm not going to go over it in this video, but you can say you wanted to pull one or two different objects in that same spawn and you want it to decide between them what it's going to show. That's something else you can code to where you can have like 2 or 3 bad guys that randomly come out of a spawn point. Once again, I'm not going to show that in this video, but if you have questions, please feel free to ask me in class about it. But that is it for this video. Like I said before, it's very simple. It's very easy. Just press F and my character spawns. Or not my character, my enemy spawn. So let's pull up this code once again. So this is the enemy move, but let's go to the enemy spawn. So once again, it's just to instantiate enemy, this transformation position, this transform position, this transform rotation. Once again, all that does is it creates an enemy at the exact spawn point with that exact rotation of whatever my spawn point is. Okay? Alright, so that is it for this video. I will see you guys in class. Have a great day.